Good morning, afternoon, evening, or night. We're not sure when you're watching us, but we're glad to be here. We're taping this on January the 6th, and it's just after lunchtime, so we're fighting nap time. But we're here to talk about more of the Kilauea eruption. We've heard a lot of curiosity among members of the public about some of the health effects of the ash gases, other particulates that are coming out during each one of the eruptions of Kilauea. And we talked a little bit about what kind of experience you might have as far as cleaning or how to prevent damage to your property. But now we want to talk about the health effects. And joining us today to talk about those elements of volcanic emissions is John Coleman. John is with the State Department of Health. John, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Typically, when we hear about volcanic emissions on the Big Island, people are concerned about VOG. We've seen a much wider variety of emissions through this series, and part of that is just because it's gone on so long. But also, we're seeing some factors in the way that the volcanic eruptions have been evolving over time as the shape of the land changes that have changed some of the products that we're seeing. VOG, of course, is the one that you hear about most in some of the media, and you'll either see VOG weather reports. What can you tell us about VOG and how big of a concern is it?
Generally, VOG is a mixture of particulates and gases that are coming from the eruptive event. Sometimes the VOG will be very isolated, more towards the ocean view area. Sometimes it'll be more wide-ranging across the island. The big part of VOG is sulfur dioxide and other sulfur compounds that are part of those gases that have come from the eruptive event. And when those kind of mix with the water and other atmospheric types of conditions, it can be a real irritant to people, normal breathing issues. And so especially people who have respiratory issues or are part of a special population, very young, our kapuna, and certainly people who may be pregnant, may experience from time to time some of those VOG issues where they have some difficulties breathing. And so, it's something that we monitor. We have air quality monitors across the island. We post that on our website to alert people. And so, knowing that, we try to give people the information that they need to kind of help protect themselves and to kind of be alert to the VOG conditions that might exist from these events. Because not only do we see it during the active eruptive events, we also see it kind of in between the events as the events continue to off-gas and send particulates and gases into the atmosphere.
Okay, and when we were talking a little bit before we started the taping, you mentioned that VOG has in some ways been a bigger issue on other islands than it has been on the Big Island for this Kilauea series.
Correct. As we've seen the last couple of episodes, our experts from the Volcanic Observatory have talked to us about that these gases and particulates are now getting above the inversion layer. They're getting much higher up into the atmosphere. So we're starting to see some effects on Oahu. Oahu's starting to see increased doctor calls and hospital calls and visits because as the VOG heads downwind, it changes a little bit in chemistry. And so in that chemistry, it gets a little bit more acidified. And some other things happen. And so we're not just the only island we've been sharing with our neighbors. And so I think, it's one of those, it's a statewide concern. And so definitely that's why we have the whole air quality network set up across the state, not only for local issues, but for these larger regional issues that occur. So again, that people have the information and knowledge.
Okay, and you'd mentioned the monitor network.
Yes.
The state has its own network, and then there are a variety of other platforms, including the Purple Air Network,
Right.
which is less precise but maybe more widespread because anybody who wants to invest the time and the effort to get a monitor can do that. We'll put up a link on the screen so that if you're interested, you can assess a whole assortment of these different monitoring sites. But there is a difference between the sulfur dioxide, as you mentioned, that's the primary component of VOG, and the particulates.
Right.
So we've seen the particulates change quite a bit as this volcanic series has gone on. With each episode, the volcano is kind of building up the floor of the crater and also elevating where the vents are. So even if you had 1,000-foot fountain at the beginning of the eruptive series and 1,000-foot fountain tomorrow's will be higher because it's starting from higher off the ground, and that tends to change the kinds of particles we see.
Right.
How big a deal are particulates from a health standpoint, and what are particular particles of concern, I guess?
Right. And so you're absolutely right. We're starting to see, because it's getting higher up in the caldera, and because the heat from the volcano is getting much higher, it's getting into a much higher layer of atmosphere, which means that those particulates could be carried much further and in a different area. So we're starting to see areas that, 6-8 months ago we weren't seeing fallout from, but now we are seeing some fallout from Pele's hairs, Pele's tears, et cetera. And so, what we're mostly concerned about is two types of particles. We're concerned about what's called a 2.5 particle, which is a 2.5 micron particle, and a 10 micron particle. Both particles can get into your lungs. The 2.5 gets much further deeper into your lungs and can cause some serious issues. So what we want to do is our air monitors do monitor particulates, and they will alert to us when we have those 2.5 type of events. And so when people are, obviously when we're experiencing ash fall from an eruptive event, we advise people to stay indoors. Advise if you're part of the population that has breathing difficulties or are part of our special populations, to close windows. If you have an air conditioner, put it on recirculation so that you're not drawing in the inside, and kind of let the particulates kind of do their thing outside. Once they settle down to the ground and the event's over, then you can wet the particles down, and then actually just sweep it off. We don't recommend blowers or anything like that. We tend to kind of keep it very simple.
Well, and especially in dry areas,
Yes.
that can just suspend them in the atmosphere.
Exactly. And if you're part of concern about breathing in particles, we recommend an N95 mask. An N95 mask will work for particulates. It will not work for gases. Okay. And so I think we want to make sure that's very clear, that if you're smelling the sulfur dioxide from the events or from the VOG, an N95 mask will not do you any good. If you're outside cleaning off Pele's hair off your patio or washing down your driveway, N95 mask will certainly prevent any of those particulates from getting into your lungs. But again, there's a big difference between gases and particulates, and N95 is really designed only for particulates.
Okay, and I think there tends to be a little bit of a sanitizing of language when we're talking about the scientific terms sometimes. Yes. We are talking about tiny particles of rock and glass. So that's what you're trying to keep out of your lungs. You don't want to breathe the glass.
Yes.
And so it is a good idea to have an N95 if you're going to be cleaning off the lanai, sweeping it off, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
What about pets? Do pets have those same kinds of hazards?
They do. We do see pets that have hazards. We, of course, encourage people to talk to their vet about it, because certain pets do have, asthma and other human-like conditions. But we do recommend, though, that because you have pets maybe coming in and out, that you have like a damp towel by the doorway so that you wash the pet's paws when they come in, so that they're not bringing those particulates from the outside into your home. And I think that's kind of where we want to, focus, is if we can keep the particulates outside, the better, so that we're not breaking it up, because like you said, it is very fine. We call it volcanic glass. The scientists have all kinds of fun chemical names for it, but it's very fine material that's very breakable. Okay. And so it can break down into very small pieces when you mechanically activate it. So stomping on it, using your leaf blower, mowing it with your lawnmower, all these kind of things can mechanically break these little particles up from a size that isn't concerning to a very size that gets very small at that 2.5 micron, which is very, very tiny. That's just over the size of a bacteria, hair type thing. So we want to make sure that people are not breathing in those types of particles and trying to minimize that contact.
Okay, and we had talked a little bit before the show about there are some implications for livestock and for agricultural uses. That's probably beyond the scope of the Department of Health's Kuleana, but we will put a link up on the screen so that people can follow that to get more information about agricultural concerns related to the particles from volcanic emissions.
Yep.
One other rural concern and many of the areas that are downwind of Kilauea are quite rural, is that water catchment is the main source of drinking water for some of these homes. What are the concerns around particulates and drinking water?
Again, because these are very fine, glass-like particulates, we don't want to be using those for drinking water. So we want to make sure our catchments are covered. Number one, let's try to keep the particulates out of it. The particulates are essentially rocks, so they will settle down to the bottom of the tank. And so if you have a floating intake, like most tanks should, then that'll stay above the level of any particulates that have settled to the bottom. And then we recommend to have a filter on the system in addition to the UV or whatever else you may be using on your system. So it's important that we kind of filter out those particulates and not, ingest them. Even though they may not cause issues, we just want to be safe and be overly out of an abundance of caution to, let's say, let's make sure that we have a filter on there. If we have a large ongoing issue where we think that catchments may become an issue, we certainly have guidance on our website as to that as well. So luckily these events have been kind of short-lived, so we haven't seen as much of a catchment as we did like in 2018 and some of those other eruptive events. But we do have that information on our website in case we do have a prolonged issue with eruptive events causing catchment impacts.
Okay, and as you've probably gathered, there's a lot of information on these subjects, probably more than we can cover in a single talk story. But if you missed the links that were posted on the screen, you can always rewind us on YouTube, or feel free to give Civil Defense a call. We can connect you with that information. We want to help you address the hazards that come from living in this wonderful place and help keep everybody safe. Until next time, that's the Preparedness Podcast. I'm Adam Weintraub, and we'll see you next month.
If where is the immediate, you kind of covered it a little bit, but where's the, where or what area is the most affected right now? If you could just answer that question.
Okay, and I did include some of that
on the website itself. Okay.
Well, it's not on the website, but the graphics that I sent to you.
Okay, perfect.
When we talked about the downwind area, there was a USGS map that was posted about 2 weeks ago that shows where the moderate fallout was, where the light fallout was, and where the trace fallout was. It's basically a long tongue that extends from the crater down to Naalehu.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then there's sort of two blobs that are bigger that show the extent of the less concentrated fall. There's also one that's called the Episode 38 Tephra map. And because that was one that was, the winds were not particularly high for that one, we saw that's the one that knocked out the remote camera. Yeah. Oh. And it buried it under something like 4 feet of tephra. But it shows the area immediately downwind and all within the national parks that was heavily covered. So it's varied very much from one episode to another. But yeah, the general shape is a tongue running downwind, and then depending on the wind, it can be short and squat or it can be long and skinny.
Yeah.
Perfect. And would you suggest wearing an N95 mask if you're going to go visit the volcano for our tourists and whatnot?
Generally speaking, if you're at the park and you're visiting a volcano in one of the sanctioned areas of the park, you're not downwind of of the tephra. The Park Service does a very wonderful job of keeping everybody safe and keeping people away from falling tephra. And so if you're not actively working with the tephra or the Pele's hair or Pele's tears, there's really not a concern that we would say universally you need an N95. It's really when you're doing those mechanical types of things, you're cleaning your lanai, you're cleaning off your driveway, you're washing, down, different your sidewalks and things like that. When you're actually mechanically going out there and working with those types of things is when we would recommend. But if you're just existing and it's just driving by, or if you're in one of the view areas at the Park Service, we generally wouldn't recommend one of those.
Yeah, and if you're a visitor and you're in one of the groups that's sensitive to, you've either had previous lung problems or you've been a heavy smoker in your life or you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, something along those lines, it's probably not a bad idea to have an N95 handy. If you find you're having discomfort, better safe than sorry. Sorry, I just thumped the mic in the middle of that answer. But it's probably a good idea to have some protection available. And the wind can always shift. So it's better safe than sorry. But it's from what you've said, it's not going to be the kind of hazard that affects the average person.
Right, and again, the N95 is only good for particulates. It doesn't work for our VOG. It doesn't work for the gases. So, if you're concerned that the wind would shift and that you might have particulates near you, then certainly you can have an N95. It won't do any harm. But generally speaking, it's as long as we're clear as to the why and how.
Cool. That's all the questions I have. And then, again, I just wanted to thank you guys. Unless you had any other things you wanted to share.
No, I think we got through what we had planned to.
I think most of it, yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you.